Negative 15 degrees Fahrenheit outside my window. Not uncomfortable, not brutal. Negative 15. The kind of cold filling ERs across western Pennsylvania that night. Frostbite, hypothermia, people dying in their cars. At 9 p.m., my heat died. The furnace went silent. The windows fogged over. I could see my own breath inside my living room. Not a broken furnace, not a missed payment. Dolores Whitcraft, HOA president of Maplerest Estates, personally called the gas company and had my heat shut off. No warning, no knock, just a smug email the next morning. Rules protect safety. I was 58, alone, wrapped in a coat inside my own house, watching the thermostat crawl toward freezing. She did that on purpose. What she didn't know. I spent 31 years as a pipe fitter. Every valve, every line, every shutoff point, including the one controlling all 45 homes in her kingdom. And that was just the beginning of what I took from her. What would you do? Drop it below. Where are you watching from? Let me take you back about 2 years before that frozen night, because none of this makes sense without understanding what I walked into when I bought that house. My name is Garrett Tolliver. I'm a retired pipe fitter, 31 years with Local 520, the kind of work where you spend your days inside industrial boiler rooms in 100-degree heat, and your lungs learn to appreciate outdoor air like a gift. When my wife, Renata, passed from ovarian cancer in 2019, I needed a change. Our kids were grown. The house in Youngstown felt like a museum of grief, so I sold it and I bought a modest 2-bedroom on a cul-de-sac in Maplerest Estates, a planned community outside of Clarion, Pennsylvania, 1,200 square feet, a half-acre lot, a detached workshop I planned to fill with woodworking tools. Quiet, simple, mine. What I didn't fully appreciate, and listen, this is important, write this down, is that planned community in rural Pennsylvania sometimes means a 30-year-old HOA charter written by one guy who's been dead since 2004, now interpreted exclusively by whoever wants power badly enough to run for the board. Maplerest Estates had 46 homes. The HOA board had 5 seats. 3 of those seats had been occupied by essentially the same rotating cast of 3 people for the better part of a decade. And sitting at the center of that little power galaxy, like a sun made entirely of grievances and clipboards, was Dolores Whitcraft. Dolores was 63, recently retired from a county zoning office, which, if you know anything about county zoning offices, tells you everything you need to know about her relationship to rules and the people who didn't follow them. She drove a white Buick Enclave that she kept cleaner than most hospital floors. She wore reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck and carried a leather-bound binder to every HOA meeting, like she was arguing before the Supreme Court. Her 2 allies on the board were Prescott Lund, a semi-retired insurance adjuster who agreed with everything Dolores said because he was terrified of her, and Mary Beth Hollander, who'd been on the board so long she'd stopped questioning anything and just showed up to vote yes. The remaining 2 board seats? Technically open. In practice, never contested, because anyone who ran against Dolores had a funny way of suddenly receiving violation notices for things like improperly angled mailbox post or visible garden hose on non-approved side of structure. The intimidation wasn't dramatic, it was bureaucratic, death by 1,000 petty letters. I'd been in the neighborhood about 4 months when I got my first notice. My workshop, which I'd built entirely to code, with permits, inspected and approved by Clarion County, allegedly violated HOA setback rules. I measured it myself. It didn't. I responded in writing with the measurements and the county permit. Dolores wrote back 2 weeks later saying the issue was under review. The smell of that first letter still gets me. Cheap printer toner and what I can only describe as institutional authority, the kind that clings to paper that's been passed through government-adjacent hands. I set it on the kitchen table, made a cup of coffee, and sat with it for a long time. I wasn't angry yet. I was paying attention. Then came the fence dispute. Then the unapproved vehicle citation for my work truck, which I'd parked in my own driveway for 12 hours. Then the demand that I paint my shutters a different shade of green. Not a different color, mind you, a different shade. Within 30 days or face a $50 per day fine. And each time I responded, politely, professionally, with documentation, which I'd learn was the exact wrong thing to do if you wanted Dolores Whitcraft to leave you alone. She didn't want compliance, She wanted submission, and when she realized I wasn't going to give her that, she started playing a different game entirely. The first real escalation happened in October, about 6 months after I moved in, and it started, as most genuinely terrible things do, with something that seemed almost reasonable on the surface. Maplerest Estates ran on a shared propane system. This was unusual and honestly a little antiquated, but it was how the development had been built back in 1991. A single large propane tank farm sat at the back of the property, fed by a service road off County Road 18, and individual lines ran underground to each home. The HOA held the master service contract with a regional supplier called Allegheny Valley Propane, AVP for short. Every homeowner paid a fuel allocation fee as part of their monthly HOA dues, and AVP billed the HOA collectively. On paper, this was a cost-sharing arrangement. In practice, it meant the HOA board controlled the master account, which meant they controlled the valve. I hadn't thought much about this when I bought the house. The home inspector mentioned it, the disclosure forms mentioned it, and I'd noted it the way you note that a house has a certain brand of water heater. Interesting, filed away, not urgent. I was a pipe fitter for 30 years. Shared fuel systems didn't scare me. If anything, I understood them better than most people in that neighborhood. What happened in October was this. Dolores sent out a community notice announcing a new fuel efficiency initiative. Starting November 1st, all residents would be required to submit their individual thermostat schedules to the HOA for optimization review. The stated goal was to reduce collective propane consumption during peak winter months and lower everyone's fuel allocation fees. I want you to sit with that for a second. She wanted residents to hand over their thermostat schedules, the times you wake up, the times you leave for work, the temperature you sleep at, all of it, to Dolores Whitcraft and her leather binder. About a third of the neighborhood complied almost immediately, which told me something important about how normalized this board's overreach had become. The crunch of gravel in Dolores's driveway as she made her rounds, collecting forms from willing neighbors, became a daily sound that October. Like some kind of bureaucratic harvest. I did not submit a thermostat schedule. I sent a written response, polite, professional, my standard approach, asking for the specific charter provision that authorized this data collection. No response for 2 weeks. Then a letter informing me that my non-compliance with community efficiency initiatives would result in a $75 monthly surcharge added to my dues. I paid it, under protest, and I started keeping every piece of paper. Now here's where Dolores made her first real strategic mistake, and it was a beauty. She got greedy. Instead of applying this surcharge quietly and moving on, she sent a community-wide email listing the names of the 7 homeowners who hadn't submitted thermostat schedules, with their addresses, publicly shaming her neighbors for choosing privacy over compliance. The reaction in the neighborhood was mixed. Some people shrugged, some were quietly angry, and one woman named Petra Sundqvist, 3 houses down from me, showed up at my door within 48 hours. Petra was 54, a former paralegal, sharp as a tack and absolutely seething. She'd been on the receiving end of 3 years of Dolores's harassment and had a file folder of her own that was nearly as thick as mine. "I know what she's doing," Petra said, standing on my porch in a barn coat, the October air cold enough to see her breath, steam curling between us like punctuation. "She's building leverage. Every piece of information she collects, she uses later." "I know," I said. "Then you know we need more than documentation." I poured 2 cups of coffee, we sat down at my kitchen table, and we started talking strategy for the first time. What we had so far: personal violation notices, the surcharge scheme, and a public shaming email. What we needed: a clear understanding of the HOA's legal authority, and more importantly, its limits. So I did what any reasonable 58-year-old retired pipefitter would do. I ordered a copy of the full HOA charter, the master service contract with Allegheny Valley Propane, the association's last 3 years of filed financial disclosures, and the original development covenants from 1991. All public record, $42 in copying fees at the county clerk's office. The woman behind the counter gave me a look when I handed over the request list. "That's a lot of paper," she said. "It's going to be worth it," I told her. I didn't know yet just how right I was. December arrived the way December always does in western Pennsylvania. without mercy and without apology. The temperature dropped into the single digits by the second week. The sky turned the color of old dishwater, and the bare trees along County Road 18 rattled in the wind like they were trying to warn somebody. That's when I found the first anomaly in the financial disclosures. Petra and I had been going through the HOA documents for about 6 weeks by this point, spreading papers across my kitchen table in the evenings after I was done in the workshop. We had a system. She handled the legal language, I handled the numbers. 31 years of reading industrial contracts and billing statements gave me an eye for discrepancies, the way a mechanic develops an ear for engine problems. You just know when something sounds wrong. The HOA's disclosed fuel costs didn't match the AVP billing structure. Let me explain this simply, because it matters. Allegheny Valley Propane charged the HOA a base rate per gallon, plus a delivery fee, plus a service contract fee for maintaining the shared tank system. All standard. But in the HOA's disclosed financials, the line item for fuel system maintenance was running about 40% higher than what the AVP contract rates would actually produce. Over 3 years, that gap represented somewhere between $18,000 and $22,000 in unaccounted for expenses. Either someone was billing the residents for services never performed, or that money was going somewhere it shouldn't. This could be a bookkeeping error, Petra said, because she was a fair person. It could be, I said. We both looked at the numbers for a long moment. It's not a bookkeeping error, she said. I made 2 calls the next morning. The first was to a certified public accountant named Walt Brubaker, who did HOA audits as a specialty, and whose name I found through the Pennsylvania chapter of the Community Associations Institute. Walt agreed to do a preliminary review for $400. The second call was to Allegheny Valley Propane's commercial accounts office, where I asked a very specific and very casual question, whether they could confirm whether the Maplerest Estates account was billed at the standard commercial rate or a negotiated rate. The customer service rep, bless her, looked it up without hesitation and told me the account had been on the standard commercial rate since 2019, when the previous negotiated contract expired. And yet the HOA had been charging residents as if a negotiated discount contract was still in effect, pocketing the difference. I sat in my truck in the AVP parking lot after that call for about 10 minutes. The heater was running. Outside, the wind was pushing dry snow sideways across the asphalt. I remember thinking, very clearly, this woman has been stealing from her neighbors and using the proceeds to fund her own little kingdom. Meanwhile, Dolores had escalated on her end. Apparently, my document requests at the county clerk's office had gotten back to her. Small towns, you understand. And she responded the way cornered petty authority always responds, with aggression dressed up as procedure. I received a certified letter informing me that my detached workshop was in violation of a secondary structure energy compliance addendum that had been added to the HOA charter in 2021. And that I was required to either bring the structure into compliance or remove it within 60 days. The addendum required all secondary structures over 200 square feet to connect to the shared propane system for heating, which would, of course, put me further under the HOA's fuel control. Here's the thing Dolores didn't know. I'd already read that addendum, and I'd already had Petra check the procedure by which it was supposedly adopted. Under Pennsylvania HOA law, specifically under the Uniform Planned Community Act, amendments to HOA governing documents require a vote of at least 67% of homeowners, with proper advance notice. The 2021 addendum had been passed by a 3-0 board vote with no community ballot, no notice, no quorum. It was void, legally unenforceable. Had been since the day they passed it. I did not tell Dolores this, not yet. I filed the information carefully in the growing binder on my kitchen table, the binder that was starting to look, Petra noted with a grim kind of satisfaction, a lot like Dolores's own leather folder. Power, as it turns out, is mostly just organized information in the right hands. The trap was being set, one document at a time. All I needed now was for Dolores to give me a big enough reason to spring it. She obliged in January. She always was generous that way. The week before everything broke open, Dolores made 3 moves in rapid succession that told me she knew she was losing ground. She just didn't know how fast. First, she called an emergency HOA meeting and proposed raising monthly dues by $90 to cover what she vaguely described as unforeseen infrastructure costs. No itemization, no documentation, just a number pulled from wherever Dolores pulled numbers, and a vote scheduled for January 15th. Second, she filed a formal complaint with the Clarion County Code Enforcement Office, claiming my workshop's electrical installation was potentially hazardous. A complaint that, I would later learn, she filed under a neighbor's name without their knowledge. Third, and this is the one that crossed the line from petty into genuinely dangerous, she contacted Allegheny Valley Propane and reported that my personally owned backup propane tank, a 120-gallon unit I'd installed legally on the side of my house for a standby generator, was improperly permitted and a potential safety hazard. She did this on a Thursday. The utility sent a compliance inspector on Friday. By Saturday morning, my generator tank had been red tagged and taken offline pending reinspection, and my backup heating option was gone. And then came Sunday night, January 12th, negative 12 degrees Fahrenheit. At 9:47 p.m., my furnace went out. I know the exact time because I was watching a game in the living room, and the temperature drop was fast enough that I noticed it within minutes. That subtle shift from ambient warmth to the beginning of a creeping cold. The way a room changes when the heat source dies. The hiss of the system went silent. The thermostat clicked uselessly. I checked the fuel pressure gauge I'd installed on my propane line, a habit from decades of work, and it read 0. I called AVP's emergency line. After 17 minutes on hold, I counted, sitting in my kitchen coat, breath starting to show in the air. A representative told me the account for my address had been flagged for a service interruption at the request of the account holder. The account holder, for my address, was the Maplerest Estates HOA. The service interruption had been requested that afternoon. By whom? I asked. The rep couldn't tell me, but I already knew. I spent that night in my truck with the engine running, parked in my driveway, wrapped in a sleeping bag I keep behind the seat from my hunting days. The cold outside was a physical presence, the kind that presses against glass and metal like it has intent, the kind that the weathermen call dangerous, not for drama, but because people actually die in it. Inside the cab, the heater worked and the radio played classic rock, and I sat there thinking about 31 years of work, about Renata, about the 2-bedroom house I'd bought to find some peace, and about a woman with a leather binder who had decided I was a problem to be managed. I wasn't angry, exactly. I was past angry. I was focused. I called Petra at 10:30 p.m. She answered on the second ring, which told me she'd been expecting to hear from me. She did it, I said. I know. I saw the AVP truck this afternoon. I need to know one thing. Ask it. The master shut-off valve for the shared system. It's on the service road, right? It's considered shared infrastructure? There was a pause. When Petra spoke again, her voice was very careful and very deliberate. The master valve and the service road are on the HOA's common area parcel, which every homeowner in Maplerest has an equal, undivided interest in under the original 1991 covenants, not the board, every homeowner. So Dolores doesn't own that valve. Nobody owns that valve. We all do. I thought about that for a moment, watching the snow drift past my windshield in the headlights. Then I need Walt Brubaker's audit finished, I said, and I need to talk to the other 44 homeowners in this neighborhood. How many do you think will actually show up? After she raised dues $90 a month with no explanation? More than she thinks. Here's the thing about petty tyrants that people don't always understand. They count on apathy. They thrive in the space between, this is wrong, and, but what can I actually do? The moment someone credible stands up and says, here is what you can do, here is the specific thing, here is the law and the number and the document, the apathy evaporates, fast. Dolores had spent a decade cultivating apathy. I was about to introduce its opposite. Walt Brubaker finished his audit on January 19th, 1 week after the frozen night, and he delivered the results in person at Petra's kitchen table, with the kind of quiet professionalism that accountants deploy when they've found something genuinely bad and are being careful about it. The number was $31,400. That was the gap. the total amount of money collected from Maplerest Estates homeowners over 4 years, above and beyond what the actual HOA expenses and AVP contract costs justified. $31,400, dispersed across a constellation of vague line items, administrative services, consultant fees, infrastructure assessment reserves. None of it documented with receipts, none of it approved by homeowner vote. All of it traceable, in Walt's professional opinion, to disbursements authorized unilaterally by the board's treasurer. The board's treasurer was Dolores Whitcraft. But here's where the reveal got truly interesting, and this is the thing I hadn't anticipated, the piece that changed the entire shape of the situation. When Walt dug into the original HOA financial structure, he found that Maplerest Estates had never properly incorporated as a non-profit association under Pennsylvania law. The 1991 documents had the right language but had never been filed with the state. For 30 years, the HOA had been collecting dues, signing contracts, and issuing fines as an entity that, in the strictest legal sense, had no formal standing, which meant, and Walt walked me through this very carefully, that every fine issued in the past 4 years was potentially uncollectible. Every contract signed by the board without homeowner ratification was potentially void, and the fuel shutoff Dolores had ordered on my home, performed under authority the board didn't actually have. Pennsylvania's unfair trade practices and consumer protection law includes provisions that cover entities collecting fees without proper authorization. Walt wasn't a lawyer, he was careful to say, but he'd seen this pattern before. He recommended I get an attorney. I already had one, a real estate and HOA attorney named Clifton Ashby out of Pittsburgh, who Petra had found and who I'd been consulting for 2 weeks. When I called Clifton with Walt's findings, he was quiet for a long moment. "Garrett," he said, "do you understand what you have here? Tell me. You have civil liability exposure for the board members personally. You potentially have criminal referral territory on the financial side, and you have a remediation path that could result in full reformation of the association, return of misappropriated funds, and recovery of every fine ever improperly collected. How long would that take in court? Months, maybe over a year if they fight it. Is there a faster way?" Another pause. "There is," Clifton said slowly, "if you can get a majority of homeowners to act collectively rather than individually. Under the Planned Community Act, a majority of lot owners can call a special meeting to remove board members for cause. You'd need signatures, and you'd need them fast before Dolores realizes what's coming and starts running interference." "How fast?" "I'd want it done in 10 days. 10 days. To quietly contact 44 households, explain a 30-year legal discrepancy, and build a consensus strong enough to topple a board that had been entrenched for a decade. All without Dolores finding out until it was too late to stop." I looked at Petra across her kitchen table. She was already reaching for a legal pad. "Split the list," she said. "Split the list," I said. The next 10 days were the most deliberately productive of my life, since the last major overhaul job I ran in the local 520 days. A full industrial boiler replacement in Altoona that required coordinating 11 tradespeople, a tight permit timeline, and a client who changed specs every other morning. This was similar, minus the client changes, and plus the constant low-grade adrenaline of knowing that if any one of our 44 neighbors mentioned the wrong thing to the wrong person, the whole operation collapsed. Petra took the east side of the cul-de-sac and the 2 cross streets. I took the service road homes and the north properties. We didn't cold knock doors. We called first, briefly, identifying ourselves and asking if we could come by to talk about the HOA dues increase. That framing was deliberate. It was accurate, it was non-alarming, and it immediately produced a, "Yes, please come in," from about 80% of the households. The conversations followed a pattern that Petra and I had worked out together. We'd sit down, we'd lay out 3 things in plain language, and we'd let people ask questions. The first thing, the $31,400 discrepancy. Walt had prepared a 1-page summary. Nothing dense, just a clear comparison between what AVP actually charged, what the charter allowed the board to collect, and where the gap went. Most people looked at that page for about 30 seconds and their faces changed. That particular expression, the one where someone realizes they've been played for a fool for years, is not anger, exactly. It's a kind of cold clarity, a calculation. The second thing, the incorporation problem. Clifton had given us a one-page layman's explanation. The takeaway, in a single sentence: every fine the HOA board collected from you in the past 4 years was collected by an entity that had no legal authority to collect it, which means you may be entitled to get it back. We didn't overstate this, we let the documents speak. But watching people connect that sentence to their own records, the $50 mailbox fine, the $200 shutter fine, the $75 thermostat surcharge, was something. The third thing, what they could actually do. Section 5211 of Pennsylvania's Uniform Planned Community Act allows a majority of lot owners to petition for a special meeting and, at that meeting, vote to remove board members for cause. Cause, in this context, was going to be straightforward, given what we had. We needed signatures on a petition from a majority of the 46 lots, 24 minimum. We were asking for more. The DIY aspect of this, and I say this for anyone listening who's ever stared down their own HOA, is that the legal mechanism already exists. You don't need a lawyer to file a petition, though having one review it helps. You don't need to prove criminal fraud before you can remove a board member. You need a majority, a specific written process, and the patience to execute it correctly. The Pennsylvania Association of Community Association Managers publishes plain language guidance online. It's free. It took me 40 minutes to read the relevant sections. Meanwhile, I was working a parallel track on the propane side. The master shutoff valve for the shared system sat in a concrete utility box on the service road, secured with a standard padlock and serviced by AVP. As a lot owner with undivided interest in the common area, I had the same legal right to access that infrastructure as any board member. I wasn't going to touch it, not yet. But I spent 3 mornings in a row walking the service road in my work coat, clipboard in hand, documenting the valve location, the line routing, and the condition of the infrastructure. To any neighbor watching, I looked like a man doing a property inspection, which is, technically, exactly what I was doing. Clifton sent a certified letter to AVP's legal department on January 22nd, notifying them that the HOA lacked proper organizational standing and that any service actions taken at the board's sole direction, including the January 12th shutoff of my residence, were legally disputed. He also attached the section of the Uniform Planned Community Act that established common area access rights. AVP's response came back within 48 hours. Pending legal clarity, they would not process any further individual shutoff requests from the board without written consent from a majority of lot owners. In other words, Dolores's valve just got unplugged. By January 26th, we had 31 signatures, 31 out of 46 lots, more than a 2/3 supermajority. Enough not just to call a meeting, but to do it with undeniable authority. Clifton filed the petition with the county that afternoon. The special meeting was set for February 3rd, a Saturday, in the Maplerest community room, a room Dolores herself had furnished and named after a late board member she'd personally appointed. She was about to see it used for something she had not planned for. 4 days before the meeting, Dolores found out. I'm still not entirely sure how. My best guess is one of the 3 households who declined to sign the petition. Politely, no drama, just not interested in conflict. Mentioned something to a neighbor, who mentioned it to someone who mentioned it to Dolores. Small cul-de-sac. Sound travels. Gossip travels faster. She responded exactly the way I expected, which was like a cornered bureaucrat who'd spent decades using procedure as a weapon and was now reaching for every tool in the box simultaneously. Monday morning, 3 days before the meeting, Prescott Lunn knocked on my door to inform me that an emergency board session had been held the previous evening. Just the 3 board members, no notice, no quorum of residents, at which the board had voted to amend the HOA charter to require a 75% supermajority instead of a simple majority for special meeting petitions. They'd typed up the amendment that night and slid copies under doors across the neighborhood before sunrise. I read it standing on my porch in the cold, the paper slightly damp from the morning frost, and I felt something that might have been admiration if it weren't so fundamentally dishonest. It was a genuinely creative move, Unfortunately for Dolores, it was also a completely illegal one. Takeaway, plain as I can make it. Under Pennsylvania law, HOA governing document amendments require advance written notice to all lot owners and a vote of the membership, not just the board. A 3-person board vote at a meeting with no notice and no resident participation doesn't amend anything. It's wallpaper. I called Clifton. He confirmed it in 90 seconds, then offered to send a responsive letter to the board. I asked him to hold off. I wanted Dolores to believe this was working. By Tuesday, the smear campaign had begun. A typewritten flyer, no signature, no name, no attribution, appeared in the mailbox area of the community, accusing Petra and me of orchestrating a hostile takeover of community assets and colluding with outside legal interests to defraud longtime residents. It was petty and it was clumsy, and it was exactly the kind of thing that, when Petra photographed it and sent it to Clifton, added a nice little defamation data point to our growing file. 3 of our 31 signatories called me that day, not to withdraw, to ask if there was anything else they could do. Wednesday, one day before the meeting, Mary Beth Hollander showed up at my door. Not aggressive, not official. She was in regular clothes, no clipboard, and she looked like she hadn't been sleeping well. Mary Beth was 61 and had been on this board for 12 years, long enough that I suspected she genuinely didn't realize how far things had drifted from legitimate governance into something else. "I want you to know," she said, standing just outside my door, her voice low, "that I didn't know about the heat shutoff before she did it. I found out the same time everyone else did." I believed her. I told her so. "The financial stuff," she said. "Walt Brubaker's audit. Is it real?" "It's real." She nodded, slowly, like she was absorbing something she'd suspected for a while but hadn't wanted to confirm. "I've been signing off on expense reports for 4 years," she said. I signed what she put in front of me." "Mary Beth, that's something you should discuss with an attorney before Saturday, personally, because your liability is different from hers, and you should understand that before you walk into that room." She looked at me for a moment. "You're being straight with me." "I'm being straight with you." She left without saying anything else. I didn't know which way she was going to go on Saturday, but I'd told her the truth, and I could live with that. That night, Dolores made one final move. She contacted AVP again and requested an emergency infrastructure inspection of the shared system, specifically the master valve assembly, apparently hoping to establish some on-record documentation that would complicate our common area access argument. AVP sent an inspector Thursday morning. The inspector found the system in fine working order, noted the Clifton letter already on file, and went home. The inspection accomplished nothing, but the attempt told me everything I needed to know about where Dolores's head was. She was no longer trying to win. She was trying to survive, and people trying to survive make mistakes. Friday night, I sharpened my woodworking chisels in the workshop, the smell of steel and linseed oil filling the cold air, and went to bed early. Saturday was going to be a long day. The morning of February 3rd arrived clear and brutally cold, the way western Pennsylvania winter mornings do when they're showing off. Bright sun, 0 cloud cover, temperature at 9 degrees, and the kind of silence that only comes when snow has packed everything tight and the world holds its breath. The crunch of my boots on the driveway gravel was the loudest sound in the neighborhood when I walked out to my truck at 8 a.m. The community room meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. I'd asked our 31 petitioners to arrive by 9:45. Dolores arrived at 9:15. I know because Petra texted me a single word: "Here." She'd brought Prescott and a man I didn't recognize, who turned out to be a personal attorney she'd hired sometime in the past 48 hours. A local guy who primarily did wills and real estate closings, and who, Clifton would tell me later, appeared to have been briefed on approximately a third of the actual situation. Dolores was dressed formally, in a dark blazer, her reading glasses on their chain, the leather binder tucked under one arm. She'd set up a table at the front of the room facing the chairs, the way a school principal sets up before a parent meeting. Position of authority, established before the room filled. What she hadn't anticipated, because she'd never seen it before in this room, was the room filling. By 9:50, all 31 signatories were present. Then families, spouses, adult children who'd come in for the weekend when their parents called. By the time the meeting was formally called to order at 10:04, There were 62 people in a room designed for 40, and the folding chairs Petra had borrowed from St. Anthony's Parish Hall were occupied from wall to wall. The low hum of conversation bounced off the wood-paneled walls, undercut by the smell of coffee from the percolator someone had sensibly thought to bring. The energy in that room was the particular energy of people who've been patient for a long time, and have just decided to stop being patient. Dolores called the meeting to order with her standard authority, crisp, formal, projecting confidence. She announced that the petition before them was procedurally deficient, and that the board had already addressed the issues raised. She presented a printed copy of the emergency amendment, the one altering the supermajority requirement, as though it were legitimate. I let her finish. Then I stood up. I want to be honest with you. I am not a dramatic person. I don't like speeches. I have never enjoyed being the center of attention in a room. But 31 years as a union pipefitter teaches you something about speaking plainly in front of a group when the situation requires it. And this situation required it. I introduced Clifton Ashby by name. I told the room that I'd retained him and that Clifton had a presentation. Then I sat down and let Clifton, who was very much a person designed for moments like this, walk through it. He covered 5 things, each one clean and documented. First, the procedural invalidity of the Emergency Charter Amendment. Second, the 30-year incorporation gap and its implications for HOA authority. Third, Walt Brubaker's audit findings, the $31,400, the itemized discrepancies, the 4-year pattern. Fourth, the January 12th service interruption of my heating system, and the AVP correspondence establishing that it had been ordered without lawful board authority. Fifth, the specific legal path forward under Section 5211 of the Planned Community Act, including the right of the assembled lot owners to vote for board removal today, right now, in this room. Dolores's attorney leaned over to whisper something to her. Dolores held up a hand, stopping him, and she looked across the room at 62 people, 31 of whom were holding copies of the petition they'd signed. Her face didn't break. She was too experienced for that. But her jaw set in a way that told me she'd been doing the arithmetic, and the arithmetic wasn't coming out in her favor. Prescott Lund, to his credit, raised his hand and said, quietly, "I'd like to recuse myself from any board vote going forward." Mary Beth Hollander was already standing. "I'm resigning," she said, clearly and calmly. "Effective now. I'm sorry. I should have done this 2 years ago." The room was very quiet for a moment after that. Then Petra called the vote. Friday night, I set my alarm for 2 a.m. Not because I couldn't sleep, though I couldn't. Because there was one thing left to do before Saturday morning, and I needed to do it in the dark, quietly, the way you do things when you've thought them through completely, and you're not second-guessing yourself anymore. I pulled on my work boots, my heaviest coat, my knit cap, grabbed my flashlight and my copy of the 1991 Development Covenants, the page establishing every lot owner's equal, undivided interest in common area infrastructure. Folded it twice, put it in my breast pocket. Old habit from job sites. Carry your authorization on your body. The service road was frozen solid, gravel locked in ice, my boots crunching in the dead quiet of a February night. No wind, no traffic, just my breathing and the flashlight beam cutting across the concrete utility box at the end of the road. The master shutoff valve. 46 homes, 1 valve. I knelt down, cleared the frost off the box lid with my sleeve, and opened it. Standard commercial gate valve, well-maintained, AVP sticker on the housing. I'd worked with 1,000 like it. I reached in, metal cold enough to burn through my gloves, and I closed it. Full shutoff. All 46 lines, including mine. I stood up and looked down the service road toward the dark shapes of 46 houses against a black sky. 46 households who were going to wake up Saturday morning with no heat, including Dolores Whitcraft. I want to be clear about something. I had the legal right to do exactly what I just did. Every lot owner in Maplerest held equal, undivided interest in that common area infrastructure. Not the board, not Dolores. Every owner equally. The same right she'd used to shut off my heat on a night that hit -15 degrees, I used to shut off everyone's, including hers. The document in my breast pocket said so. Clifton had confirmed it, and I'd left a copy with Deputy Harkins the day before, along with a note explaining exactly what I intended to do and why. I walked back to my house, made coffee, and waited for morning. By 8 a.m., Dolores's phone was ringing. Petra texted me from her front window. Lights on at her place. She's moving fast. By 9 a.m., Dolores had called AVP's emergency line. The dispatcher, operating under the legal notice Clifton had filed, informed her that restoration of service required written authorization from a majority of lot owners, not the board president, a majority of lot owners. She had no majority. She had a leather binder and a shrinking clock. She arrived at the community room at 9:15, and I watched her come through that door. Not the usual clipboard under-arm confidence, not the reading glasses already positioned. She was calculating, running numbers, looking for an angle that wasn't there anymore. Her heat had been off since 2 a.m. She'd spent the morning on the phone, getting nowhere. She walked into that room already knowing she'd lost. She just hadn't decided yet whether to admit it. The room filled steadily. By 9:50, all 31 petitioners were present, plus families, plus neighbors who'd heard and come anyway. 62 people in a room built for 40. Someone had brought a percolator. The smell of coffee filled the space. Warm, ordinary, the particular comfort of people gathered with purpose. Dolores called the meeting to order, presented the emergency amendment, spoke about procedure and stability and community values. The leather binder was open on the table. She was good, I'll give her that. Even cornered, she was composed. I let her finish. Then Clifton walked through everything. The incorporation gap, the $31,400, the shutoff, the petition. Clear, documented, unanswerable. Prescott Lund raised his hand and recused himself halfway through. Mary Beth Hollander stood up and resigned before the vote was called. When it came, it was 31-2. Dolores Whitcraft, removed. Prescott Lund, removed. Mary Beth Hollander, already gone. I walked back to the service road 20 minutes after the vote, knelt at the same utility box, and opened the valve. Full restoration. All 46 lines. The whole neighborhood had been without heat for 9 hours, on a cold February morning, by a lot owner acting within his legal rights on common area infrastructure. Exactly the way Dolores had shut off my heat at -15 degrees. The difference was, I turned it back on the same day. Then I walked inside, made coffee, and sat in my living room while the furnace hummed back to life through the walls. 72 degrees. Earned. By March, Maplerest Estates had a new HOA, properly filed with the Pennsylvania Department of State this time, nonprofit status applied for and pending, charter drafted with actual resident input and an attorney's review. 5 seats on the new board, all contested, with 11 neighbors putting their names forward. Petra Sundqvist won her seat by the widest margin. She chairs the Finance Committee, which now meets monthly with fully open books. The $31,400 from Brubaker's audit became the central figure in a civil recovery action, a separate track from the criminal investigation, that Clifton filed on behalf of 17 homeowners who could document specific improperly collected fines. The process is ongoing, but the HOA Reserve Fund, reconstituted under transparent management, sits healthier today than it has in years because it's no longer leaking. Here's what the Uniform Planned Community Act allows, and I want to say this clearly for anyone in a similar situation. You can file for financial accounting under Section 5311, which requires HOA boards to make full financial records available to any lot owner upon written request. If they refuse, a court can compel it. The request takes a stamp. The statute is free to read online. Start there. One sentence takeaway. Your HOA is legally required to show you the books. Make them. The shared propane system is still in place because 46 homes rebuilt around it would be absurdly expensive. And honestly, it works fine when it's managed by people who aren't weaponizing it. We renegotiated the AVP contract collectively for the first time in years and saved the neighborhood an average of $340 per household in annual fuel costs. For a community where a lot of people are on fixed incomes, that matters. As for me, my workshop is done. I finished it in April, woodworking tools arranged along the walls, the smell of fresh-cut oak and sawdust filling the space on the days I work in it, which is most days now. Renata would have liked it. She was the one who always said I needed a place to think with my hands. She was right, as she generally was. The community did something I didn't expect. In the spring, after everything settled, a group of neighbors organized the first Maplecrest Estates Community Day. A cookout, some folding tables, kids on bikes in the cul-de-sac, someone's uncle playing acoustic guitar, badly and enthusiastically. The new board announced that a portion of the recovered funds from the civil action, if and when they arrive, would seed a Maplecrest Community Scholarship for graduating seniors from the local high school district. Kids in Clarion County who want to pursue trades, technical education, or community service careers. The first award, if the timeline holds, will go out in 2025. $31,000 doesn't fix everything, but turned into scholarships for kids learning pipe fitting, electrical, construction, or public administration, it does something. It puts the money back into the community it was taken from, in a form that grows. That felt right. I'm not a hero in this story. I want to be clear about that. I'm a retired pipe fitter who got cold and got organized. The real heroes are the 30 people who listened, who showed up, and who were willing to say, enough. Community courage is ordinary people deciding, on a specific day, that the cost of inaction is higher than the cost of showing up. That's it. That's the whole mechanism. If you're watching this and you're dealing with an HOA board that's gone off the rails, start with the documents. Get the charter. Get the financials. Know what your state's planned community statute actually says. Connect with your neighbors before you need to. And if it ever gets to the point where someone shuts off your heat in a blizzard to make a point, know that the valve works both ways.
You know what nobody tells about after a story like this? The quiet. Not the meeting, not the vote, not the Dolores walking out past 31 of her neighbors without saying a word. Just the quiet when the heat came back on. Gary didn't win because he worked all that hard. He won because he was more prepared. 31 years reading pipe system, years contrast pressure bills, and he applied every bit of it to a later fire curling HOA president who thought nobody would ever actually read the document. 400,000 collected quietly over for a year from neighbors who trusted the process because they didn't know they had the right to question it. The number matters not just because it's thief, but because it's only work as long as nobody look. Here's what I want you to sit with. Most HOA boards aren't Dolores, but some are. And the difference between a board that serves the community and the one that pays off it is usually just whether anyone pays attention. Have you ever actually read your HOA's financials? Not just the summary they send you, the real numbers, because in most states, you have the legal right to request them. Full disclosures in writing, and most people never ask. Garrett asked, and that question changed everything. If this story hit close to home, share it. Someone in your neighborhood needs to see it. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe. We're just getting started.